All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Whether you're joining us in real time online or after the fact a couple days from now or wandering in here in person at the Museum of Glass, welcome to our monthly interview and concert series. Today we have the wonderful pleasure of having the great musician and band leader and composer and arranger and trumpeter and accordionist, the great Bobby Medina. Bobby, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so we're here in Tacoma at the Museum of Glass for part of our monthly series, and this is made possible by KNKX, Tacoma Creates, Ted Brown Music, Edward Jones Financial Consultant, Rick Gray, Titus Will Cars, and the Rainier Foundation, and of course you for taking part in this. And I always want to make sure we get that out of the way before we get started to let everyone know who's supporting this. And so what we're going to be doing is doing an interview here with Bobby for about 45 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes we'll open things up for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments for myself and Bobby, and we'll get to them later in the interview here. So Bobby, you've been around the Pacific Northwest for a long time, and many musicians that are on the scene know about you and your skills as a band leader and a trumpeter. For people that don't know you as a musician, where did music start and where did you begin, and how did that whole thing begin for you?
Music for me started when I was, well, first of all, it started for me in my household because my dad had a great record collection. And my dad's from the States, and my mother was from Mexico. So we had a lot of jazz, a lot of soul music in my dad's collection, and my mother had opera music because her mother had been an opera singer in her early years in Mexico. And we of course had mariachi music and different kinds of Latin music. So we had all that in our household. But my real start began one day. I was almost 5 years old, and there was a knock at the door. And this was back in the day when people would be selling door to door. Fuller Brushman, the Avon lady, all that kind of stuff. And so this guy comes and he's knocking on the door one afternoon, and he asks my mom, "Do you have any kids?" And me and my brother are kind of peeking around the corner, and she says, "Yeah, I got 2 kids." He says, "Well, I represent a brand new accordion school that's moved in a couple blocks away, and we're looking for some students, and I wonder if maybe your son might be interested in music." So she lets him in, and he pulls out this little box, and straps it on me, and I thought it was pretty cool, and so he asked her, what she thought, and she says, "Well, I think music would be a great idea for him." And she asked me, and she said, you have your 5th birthday coming up in a week or so, she said, "How would you like that?" And I said, "Wow, that would be cool." So for me, it was the gift of music that both my parents gave me, and that's how I started.
Well, excellent, thank you. For the historical part of these interviews, what time period are we talking here?
We're talking late 60s.
And this was Los Angeles, correct?
This was Orange County, yeah. I was born in what I like to call the most northern part of Mexico, which is East Los Angeles, California. And but I spent most of my childhood down in Orange County in a place called Garden Grove, which is right next to Anaheim. So that's kind of where I grew up.
And so you began early age, 5. Well, you had a lot of musical influences just by proxy in your household, and then you began, your first instrument was accordion. And so what happened from there? You're playing accordion, there's music in the house, and then what happened?
Well, what would happen for me, I guess what really made the music bug bite me is that we would go on vacation, and a couple times a year we would drive down to Mexico to go see our family. Thanksgivings, we would drive up to San Francisco area to visit our American family up there. And my dad would always say, "Throw the accordion in the car," and so we'd throw the accordion in the back of the car. And, they'd get to having fun, and women were cooking in the kitchen, and the guys were out, talking and stuff. And my dad would just say, "Hey, go get the accordion," And I'd get the accordion and I'd play some little tunes and stuff, and everybody would clap and they would cheer and they were having fun. And I saw how much joy that music brought to the average person. And mind you, I wasn't much of a musician at that point, but the amount of fun that it brought them and me, it was something that was life-changing. And I knew this was it.
So you're playing the accordion, and then at some point, I mean, I'm assuming you went to elementary school, middle school. Did you start taking band class? What happened after at this point? Like the earlier part of like music education after what you're talking about.
Well, I couldn't get in, in the school band with an accordion. It reminds me, there's a Woody Allen video where he's the cellist in a marching band. Have you seen that? And there's a parade, and the marching band's and he's got a chair, and he's running, and he's putting the chair up and playing 3 bars. So I think of the accordion as that in a marching band. But my dad was a big influence to me, and he had played trumpet as a kid, and so I wanted to be a lot like my dad. So I back in those days, it's kind of funny, there was actually a test you took in school, an IQ test, to see what instrument you were qualified to play, which is very strange for me to think that nowadays. But I really wanted to play drums, but apparently I never was good in math, so apparently I wasn't a candidate for that. So it was kind of between a sousaphone or an old cornet, so I thought, I got kind of a long walk to school, so I'll take the smaller instrument. And eventually, my dad found me a trumpet rather than the cornet, and I began playing that, and I really, really enjoyed it. I guess the other thing I have to say about the trumpet, which is by far my main instrument, I still play a little accordion, but when I was a kid, I seemed to really be a natural on the accordion and keys and stuff. And I had a tremendous amount of technique that I developed. And it was so much so that I was kind of bored with it. And my mother used to really kind of stick me in a room and make me practice. And I was taking lessons, I remember at the time, from a really nice Italian woman. And she was very cool and lax about practicing. And I was learning a lot, but she got cancer, and she referred me over to this guy named Mr. Valentine. And Mr. Valentine took me on as a student, and my mom would come to my lessons with me and sit there in the middle of the, behind watching. And on the first lesson, Mr. Valentine said, "So here's the deal. You either practice, what was this, 1 hour straight, or you have to practice 2 45-minute sessions." And that really kind of turned me off a little bit, because my mom would put me in the den to practice, and I don't hear you practicing. So I'd be practicing, and boy, that when minute 46 or 47 came up, it felt like an eternity, And so it kind of didn't make it fun for me. And I think that practicing, even to this day, with my son, and my daughter played harp and all that, I never forced them to practice. It has to come I think, from within, and you should want to do it, And there's times for me to this day as a trumpet player, it's kind of like lifting weights. You pretty much have to do it most every day. But I do, when I don't feel like playing it, once in a while, I'll take a day or 2 off maybe, and I still remember how to play it,
Well, so began with trumpet, and so at what age, what time period, what year in school did you start with trumpet?
7th grade, junior high. We called it junior high down there. I don't know. We have middle school up here, right?
Well, so yeah, and so you were already listening to. You said your folks had a pretty extensive music collection. So did you, at that point, were you aware of trumpet players? Were any trumpet players that you liked, or did that come later?
It kind of started around that time. My dad would play a record, and I remember he had great records. He had Harry James, and as a great trumpet player and a jazz musician of that time, the swing musicians, he was phenomenal. And it kind of gave me an idea, I think, in the back of my mind, although my dad didn't say it, this is a good trumpet sound. He played Al Hurt. And like I said earlier, my mother had symphonic albums and opera singers, so I had certain concepts in my mind. And that's where it started. And then that went further when I got into high school, because in high school we got into jazz band. And I was in jazz band from day one. You know, I was in everything I could be. And then my father's record collection also turned into an 8-track tape collection. So we would go buy 8-track tapes together, and I remember buying Miles Davis. I had no idea who he was at the time or anything, but I listened to it. I thought, wow, that's another kind of sound. And we'd hear like sort of more like salsa, tropical kind of bands playing. It's another type of playing, you know. So all these things have been influences to me throughout my life, and I listen to as much world music as I can. I really like the idea of music from different parts of the world and how it's evolved.
Well, also geographically, where you are at that time period is well known for a really strong music scene in general across the board. I mean, you name it. So were there places, I mean, as a young student getting things together, were there places where you could go play, places where you could go hear lots of great music?
Absolutely. I mean, there were restaurants, there were like country clubs you could go see, you know, one Sunday a month. I remember there was a country club you could go see Ray Anthony's band play with all the top LA guys. You could see Gerald Wilson. I saw Gerald Wilson playing at the we had a big there was a big mall, Newport Center or something in Newport Beach. And in the summer times, they had a series there. And man, they had some of the greatest bands in LA and players, you know, all there playing. And there was just a lot of restaurants. There was a lot of things happening at, you know, performing arts centers and colleges and stuff. So Disneyland was there, Knott's Berry Farm. I mean, Disneyland, they had jazz days. I see Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, Chick Corea, Maynard Ferguson. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And my dad would take me to all of those, you know.
So for you, with this amazing world of influences at home, around the community, who were some musicians? I'm assuming there were some local musicians that you kind of maybe gravitated towards or looked up to or enjoyed their playing. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of great musicians in there. When I was young, I'll back up and I'll say that I was, I think 16-ish, and my father worked for McDonnell Douglas in the aerospace industry, and he had a picture of me in my school marching band outfit with my trumpet in my hand. And one day, a guy that he worked with said, "Hey, Bob," my dad's name is Bob too, and he said, "Hey, Bob, do you know, does your son know how to play polkas?" And my dad says, "I don't know. I mean, I think so. He plays some on his accordion, but I don't know about on trumpet." Long story short, this guy had been in this sort of top Polish polka band. There was a kind of this Slavic Polish scene there, community, and they were playing all over the place in this. So I joined that band, and it was a real education, not only into music but into life, you know, and learning about people, how to deal with people, people's reactions, how to interact with musicians. I was very like Alex over there. I was painfully shy as a kid, and that really kind of brought me out of my shell, and it taught me, that kind of really piqued my interest for world music, because we played Polish music, Hungarian music, Czech music, Lithuanian music, German music, Italian music. I mean, like a lot of different stuff. And they played some standards and stuff too, which was cool. So I would get to play a little bit of that. And then at that time in high school, I bought a keyboard, and I began also playing keyboard, accordion, and trumpet on these gigs.
So when you were in school, middle school, high school, I'm assuming there were other great players in the programs as well. Are there any players that you came up with that are playing today, solid players?
Oh, yeah. Well, shortly after high school, I guess I'll say when I was in college, I wound up playing at two pretty influential places in the area. And one of them was called the Crystal Cathedral, which was led by, was a church led by Robert Schuller. And I played in their orchestra on Sunday mornings, on some Sunday morning, not all of them, but it was televised around the whole world. And there were some fantastic musicians in there. And in that same church would also do an Easter pageant and a Christmas, the Glory of Christmas and the Glory of Easter, which were big time productions, bringing in big time actors and tech and everything you could imagine. So being around a lot of those people was an influence. And then the other job I got was working at Disneyland. And so I would work there seasonally as a trumpet player. And my role over there was I was one of the toy soldier trumpet players that were marched in the Disneyland parade, the Main Street parade. And we were Santa's toy soldier trumpet. So we were at the end of the parade right in front of the big Santa float. But at the time, like I've known Wayne Bergeron, who's become like probably the most top-rated studio trumpet player of my generation for years, and he's still in the game. And there's guys like Sal Lozano from that era. There's a lot of people that I came up through the ranks with that I know because of that.
You mentioned Wayne Bergeron. I know this was years ago. We had him as a guest at Pierce College when I was teaching the band. Andy Martin, who I also know did a bunch of Disney stuff.
Yeah.
Was he around the same time that you were there?
Yeah, we're all around the same age.
Okay, all right.
I'm younger than them, actually.
Okay, all right. Middle school. What was the name of the middle school you went to, or the?
I went to Jordan Junior High.
Okay, and then high school afterwards.
I did.
What was the name of?
I went to two high schools. I went to Bolsa Grande High School, which was close, and then I wound up getting kicked out of band, and went to a different high school. I went to La Quinta High School in Westminster, which was also in a way kind of a blessing because I had a really great, albeit really tough band director, someone who was really kind of tough on me and tough on the band in general, but she demanded excellence and it set up a good work ethic.
Did I'm assuming private lessons on trumpet or piano, or I mean you already mentioned the accordion.
Yeah, I did have private lessons on trumpet. The lady that I took accordion lessons from, her daughter was an excellent trumpet player, and so I wound up taking lessons from her when I was in high school, and. Yeah, at the end of high school, I had, in my senior year of high school, I think, maybe it was my junior year of high school, I had gone to see Bobby Shue play with a big band in the area, college big band. And I waited till everybody left. And the room cleared out, and he was down in this cubbyhole, gathering up all of his stuff, and I went down and chatted with him and told him how much I enjoyed his playing and all that, and I asked him if he taught, and he says, "Yeah, I teach," but he said, "I'm going to tell you, there's like a year waiting list, but I'll put you on it." So he pulled out this book and he writes my name and number down and everything, and I kind of thought, yeah, sure, and probably around a year later he called me. And my dad picked up the phone, and we didn't have even answering machines back then, My dad picks up the phone, and he says, "Hey, there's this guy named Bobby Shue calling for you." I said, "Really? Wow." So I went, and he said, "Hey, I'm just calling you back. We met." And he says, "I have an opening, and I got you down, and you're next on the list." And so I said, "Yeah, I'm in," And I was jumping for joy and yelling around the house, and my parents were like, "What's going on?" And they didn't understand the scope of who he was or who he is, and we're still good friends. I still talk to him and communicate with him all the time.
Yeah, I think for people that don't understand, I mean, but if you're a musician, you probably, or particularly trumpet player, of Bobby Shue. He's an amazing musician in general, but also a very, very good educator and well known for that.
Yeah.
So that's a huge deal. So how long did you study with Bobby?
Oh, well, a few, couple, 3 years off and on, and he helped get me some gigs and get me started, point me in the right direction. And then I would once in a while maybe pop in or call him, As trumpeters, sometimes we experience different issues, and he's a guy that's considered the guru, the Yoda. They call him the Yoda of trumpet, and so I've had these chats with him in the past where I've called him up. I said, hey, I got this or that going on. I'm having some problems, and he'll kind of give me some ideas of what I can do and kind of get me out of it. And then in college, I also took lessons with one of the world's great trumpet teachers, and he's more of an embouchure specialist than really teaching. He didn't really teach me music, but he was more classically based, named James Stamp, and he's like, if people know that name in the trumpet world, he's no longer around, and he was like 75 or 76 years old when I first started taking lessons. But boy, my very first lesson, to give you some perspective, I had braces, and I had the world's most cloudy and unfocused tone you can imagine. And I could never fix it. And I was in drum corps. I was in all of these other things, working and practicing, but I had some real issues, and I didn't know what was happening. And he asked me to buzz on my lips. He buzzed on his lips, and I had never seen anybody do that. And he played a couple scales just on his mouth, and then he asked me to do that, and I could barely get a low C out, and I finally got a C to C sharp, and then he moved me over to the mouthpiece. And then I did that, and then he moved me over to the horn. And from that moment on, my tone completely cleared up, and I understood what it was like to have your chops vibrate in the correct way and be in sync with the instrument, so that it resonates at its best,
At what point, how old were you when you began studying with Bobby Shu?
I think I was probably 17, 18, something like that.
So at that point, were there sessions and places we could go play and actually do, jazz and improvise and that kind of stuff? I mean, I'm assuming there has to have been. So
there were. I'm sure there were some. I mean, I would sit in with certain groups at restaurants. There were some restaurants that had some kinds of, like, they'd have somebody present, like the band would play for like the first hour or so, and then they would bring a few people up, here and there. And so I would fall by some of those places. But I, by and large, went out to see it. And Bobby would be playing. There used to be a place out in Hollywood called Dante's, and I would go there. The Baked Potato. It was more up in L.A. area where there was more of that, and I was in Orange County. There was less of it there. But then there were some other things going on, like when I was in college, I went to Cal State University at Fullerton, and it wasn't terribly far from where I live. That was part of the reason. And there was a restaurant, a big Mexican restaurant in Placencia, which is right next door to Fullerton. And I'm trying to think of the name of it. Tlalquepaque was the name of this restaurant. And I went in there because I heard there was music, and they used to have dances there on Friday afternoons. And Poncho Sanchez was playing down there, and that's where I met Poncho, and I got to play with him there, and I got to play with him a couple times outside of that on his band and in festivals and stuff. And so those are the kind of things, where I learned a lot from,
Well, and it sounds like at this point, like high school, college, you're working and playing gigs, correct?
I was.
Safe assumption?
I was, yeah. Then right immediately after college, I went to work on a cruise ship. That's where I met Darren Motamedy. We were roommates, causing all kind of mayhem out on the high seas in our early 20s. And no, we had a lot of fun. And that was playing in a big band, a 9-piece big band, 6 horns, 3 rhythm. And we would play shows. We would play big band sets. Back in those days, the shows, they would bring in a cast of 4 people from this company in New York that would provide them. And it was two guys and 2 gals, and we would play essentially a show of excerpts from all these Broadway musicals that was put together into a nice format. And so I got a lot of a lot of good experience there. And then Darren and I would lead a cocktail jazz combo for 2 different seatings every night. Everything was 2 because our ship held like 1,200 people, but the showrooms didn't hold that many people, you know, so they had 2 cocktail hours, two show times, and then 1 big long dinner set at the end of the night.
What time period is this?
Oh gosh, let's see. I was 22, so like 1982, 84 maybe, somewhere around there in that ballpark area, I think.
Okay. I want to jump back really quickly. I like to ask this because you said Cal State Fullerton, which has long had a reputation for great jazz and music education. Did you go to college for music, or was it double major, or what was the
No,
what was the focus?
I went to school for music, and at the time that I went to that particular school for music, it had, and I think it still does, it has a great reputation for music education. Of which I didn't want to, I like the idea of music education, but I didn't want to pursue a particular career as a band director, for instance. And their jazz their jazz program was really limited. That was kind of the beginnings, I think. You know, they had some things before that. But during the time I was there, it was mostly orchestral until a guy named Burgess Gardner came on from Chicago who had played with Horace Silver and Count Basie and all kind of people. He was a great trumpet player. And he took me under his wing, and I would go to his apartment, and he'd teach me how he was writing these. He would write these beautiful arrangements, and he would show me what he was doing. He would show me what to practice and stuff. So I owe a lot to him for that. And he's no longer around. His son, Derek Gardner, is also a tremendous player who's played with Basie and a whole bunch of bands as well. So.
Well, I know just my associations with you, and this is kind of jumping way ahead. There'll be bands that come through town, and you'll maybe know the music director and then put things together for them. So I'm assuming, based on what you're saying, I mean, there was a lot of that stuff maybe kind of starting at that point in time. Is that not?
Yeah, what happened to me is, let me try to get the context right in here. I had a couple years where I started playing casuals. And it could be a bar mitzvah, it could be a wedding, it could be a corporate party. And there was a guy that had a company out there that I started working for, but it was kind of sporadic. And then I met another guy who happened to be Indian. He was British, but he was of Indian descent. And he was a great singer and a pretty good guitar player. He sang kind of like Engelbert Humperdinck, or Tom Jones kind of guy. His name was Ramani. And he sort of introduced me. I sort of played trumpet. He would put these shows on that he would create with a small big band, and I started just playing trumpet in the band. And then he found out that I played keyboards. And when he had a smaller group, I would play keys and trumpet. And then I learned how to play key bass. And so then I really became his musical director, and I was sometimes I was playing key bass and trumpet, but for the most part I was playing just keyboards. And then he had a little sort of an agency where he booked himself essentially, and he sort of taught me the beginnings of contracting and how to put a band together and get into the private events sort of world. And then I was playing some of the bigger shows just as a sideman with like the Temptations or the Four Tops or whatever, and I would know their music directors. So then when I moved up here, I would get in touch with them, and then they would start to call me for those kinds of things. And well, the other thing I have to say also, besides that, which kind of opened a lot of doors for me, was when I did tour with Ray Charles, and after I did that, that opened up a lot of doors for me.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask, and now we're going to be jumping back and forth here. But can you talk about how you got the gig with working with Ray Charles?
Yeah. I have two friends that played great trumpet. One's no longer around, unfortunately, but we're all born on the same day. We're all born on October 3rd. And one of them, Sal Cracchiolo, who played for years with Poncho Sanchez, and he played for Power for maybe 10 or 12 years. And so he left them right around COVID time. And then Tony Lujan was another guy in LA that I met, and he'd played all these big shows, and he had played with Tito Puente and Eddie Palmieri and a lot of the big Latin bands of the East Coast as well. But in LA, he was playing and doing studio music and all this sort of stuff. So there was a Latin band that started. I became part of it. It was called the HMA. And it was the HMA Big Band, and that meant Hispanic Musicians Association. And you didn't have to be Hispanic, by the way, to be in the band, because not everybody was. But there were a lot of Latinos in the group, and it was kind of like a giant big band, salsa band, but it had kind of a 1950s kind of Cuban kind of vibe. And there were some great writers in the band. And so that is where I met Tony. And we became really good friends. And he would throw me an occasional casual or something. And as years went on, Tony had played on Ray Charles' band. And he called me up one day and he said, "Hey, there's going to be an opening on Ray's band." And he says, "I know the MD. Would you like to do an audition for that?" He says, "I can get you an audition. I can't guarantee you a gig or anything, but I can get your foot in that door." I said, "Of course, you know." So that's kind of how it started. I went and did this audition, and it was a very strange audition because there was a whole bunch of trumpeters there, but there were also a whole bunch of trombone players that were flying in from all these different states, and there was no trombone position available. You know, but I remember it started on Monday, and everybody would get a round to play, and I played. And Tuesday I came back, and there were fewer trumpeters. Wednesday I came back, there was fewer trumpeters, and Ray Charles came in. This was in his studios. He had owned a big building in Los Angeles, a multi-level building, and in the basement was his recording studio and rehearsal facility. And I saw him walk in behind the glass, and I got, oh my God, and I have this solo coming up. And they were recording me on they were recording all of us on this little cassette player and playing, apparently they were playing the tapes for him at night. And so he heard me play. Yeah, I was playing when he walked in, and then he sat down and he said, "Okay, we're gonna record that on the 2-inch tape," you know. And so they recorded that and a couple other things I did. And then Thursday came the next day, and I was the only trumpet player, and this was the beginning of rehearsing. And I asked the trumpet section leader, Mark Curry at the time, great trumpet player too, mouthpiece developer and all of that stuff, entrepreneur, the greatest section leader you could ask for. I asked him, I said, "Hey man, it's like Thursday, there's no other trumpet players here, and I know this tour's like leaving pretty soon. Does this mean I'm in, or what's going on?" And he said, "I don't know, let me talk to MD and blah blah blah." So after lunchtime, they got one of the guys that was essentially one of the roadies guys to take me up to Ray's office. And if you saw the movie Ray, you know, they made this big deal out of the big mahogany doors. So that was his office. And so I'm walking down this hall, and he kind of snidely says, "You better enjoy this, because this is the last time you're ever going to see this hall. And it's full of Grammys and platinum records and gold records and all of that stuff." And he knocks on the door, you know, "Mr. Charles, Mr. Medina is here to see you." And he opens the door and he lets me in. And as God is my witness, Ray is playing with 2 stuffed animals behind his desk, kind of going crazy. And then he throws them down on the floor and he stands up and he says, "Hi, I'm Ray Charles. It's so nice to meet you." And I thought, okay, this is this is like something out of a dream, out of a weird dream. And he had asked me, he says, we're gonna go in a week, and he says I have to ask, because like not everybody wants to tour, and we're going to be gone for the most of the year, and some guys just want to do studio work or the shows that are in town, and which was mostly not true. And I said, no, I'm ready to go. I can pack up and leave anytime. So he says, well, he says, the job pays $700 a week, whether you play one day a week or whether you play all the time. Isn't that great? I said, yeah, it's great, And we played every single day, man. I think in the first 9 months I had 2 days off, and most of your free days were travel days or something like that. But I would have paid to be on that band. It was amazing. It was something special.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this because, a lot of people maybe they've seen the movie, but to understand the reality of, yes, you're playing this great music with an icon, but what is the reality day to day, life on the road with other bandmates traveling? And for your experience, what was that like for people that are just wondering?
It was great. I loved it. I was 22 years old.
Single with no children, I
Single with
imagine.
no children, I learned a lot of things, and one of the things I learned was from the road manager. One day we were in Italy, and we used to stop for cigarette breaks and all that, so guys that smoked would do that, and I was talking to him, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's shaking his head. And I said, what's the matter, Saul? And he said, he says, I've been out here for 18 years. My daughter's graduating from college today, and I feel like I don't even know her. And a big light bulb went off in my mind, in my head, and I said, note to self, don't do that. And so I had such a great upbringing with my parents always being around and being there for me and having that solid core that's been a big part of my life for when I had my kids. We'd have, I know I'm getting off track, but I'm just going to say this one thing. It's like, I would have like some of the guys from the Four Tops over our house or whoever might be playing with and my kids would say, Dad, you're playing with all these famous guys. How come you're not famous? I'd say, well, you like me to go to your ballet, right, and your gymnastic events, yeah? And I'd tell my son, you like me to go to your soccer games and your plays and all that, yeah? I said, well, I did all that a long time ago, and I chose to make music and be around here so I could be at home every night, for you guys. But being on the road, it had its good points and its bad points. We traveled. In the States at the time, we traveled by plane, so it wasn't too bad. But in Europe, we traveled on a bus. And we could sometimes, like one time we played in Sicily at the time, the 5th most exclusive resort in the world for all these mafiosi that were coming into this party by boat and stuff. And then the next day we left and we drove get on the ferry. We ferried over to the mainland, and then Ray jumped on a flight to Rome, and we went to the very north of, it's like the south of France, north of Italy, where they have all the gaming, San Remo it's called, and there it's a big, casino-laden place, and it was like a 3-day bus trip to there. And when we got there, we were all dirty. I hadn't shaved and showered or anything in 3 days, and we got there and it was like, get your stuff and get on board, and the old timers when I first got on had told me, always have your black shoes. We had rules. Ray Charles had a book of rules that you had to follow, and if you broke them and you got caught, everyone that was broken was $100 fine. So some of the rules were like you had to have a black bow tie, sort of a certain kind of bow tie. You had to have the right kind of tuck shirt. You had to have black socks, not navy blue. You had to have patent leather shoes, not just regular shoes. He wanted your shoes shiny all the time. There were reasons for all of that stuff. But they said always keep your shoes and your horns somewhere. Don't let them go underneath with your bags, because what I'm going to tell you happened. And what happened was we got to our destination. We jumped off. I had my shoes and I had my horns, but I couldn't get to my. We went into the venue, into our dressing room and all that, and I realized I didn't have my black socks on. I had like some white socks, and I'm like, oh well, I'll just run out to the bus and grab them. Well, the bus driver was nowhere to be found, and it was all locked up. And I was a soloist, and the guy that I replaced, Jimmy Seeley, who's another great trumpet player, he's a New York guy. We're similar in stature. I think he's even a little shorter than I am, but I acquired some of his tuxes and some of the jackets that he wore. There was speculation that that's the reason that I got the gig, because I fit Jimmy's clothing, but I don't think so. So I'm thinking now I have this stupid pair of white socks on, and I have to play every night. I have to go out in front of the band, and when I walk out, the roadies would be on the lookout. And when they busted you, they would tell Joe Adams, the agent, who would pay you, and we got paid in Europe in cash. And he would pull, like, if you got busted, he would pull out whatever the fund. This is for having white socks. This is for not having the right bow tie or whatever. And then he would give them half of that money, to keep everybody in line. So I'm thinking, geez, now I'm going to wind up losing more money tonight than I'm making, But as I went without socks that night, hoping to not draw any attention to my ankles, and fortunately the stage was small enough that there was no walking out, and it was one of the very few nights that I actually played my solo from behind the front, where you couldn't see anything at all. So I lucked out. But it was fun, It's a lot of traveling. Sometimes people's tempers flare and people get annoyed with each other. But I sat in the very back, and I had a great seatmate, Steve Sigmund, who was one of the trombone players, and we got along really well. So
I have many more questions, but we're getting to that time. So if there's any questions for myself or Bobby, please let us know. Are there any questions? Yeah. Okay. If you have questions, put them in the comments, and we're happy to address them. So you've been in the entertainment business for a long time, and there's all these different facets. There's jazz, there's classical, there's salsa, there's many, many different things. But at the forefront of this, as long as I can remember knowing about you, you've been a band leader, and you've also toured with all these great musicians around the world. Do you see... As a band leader and a producer, do you see the economics of it changing? Obviously, there's a million different ways you can answer that, but from someone who's been out on tour, do you see band leaders bringing large ensembles like that on the road full time, or has that kind of gone away over the last 10, 20 years?
Like a good politician, I feel good. I feel strongly both ways about it. I think it's hard to travel with a band. Like you, I occasionally travel with, and I get to bring out my band, and the band that I mostly do that with is what I call my Latin American jazz experience group. And we're a group of people that some of them come up from South America and different states and stuff, and we usually get together somewhere and start our tour there. And then when we go to Europe, it's super costly. And so if you're a big name and you have a big draw, I think and you have merch and a lot of other things going for you, I think you can tour, and people are touring, But I think if you're somebody that is maybe not as well known, that's kind of how I am. I have some niches like you got a thing in France. I like to go. I go to Sweden. I lived in Sweden for a little bit, and I've developed sort of a following in certain areas there. So when I play, it's usually, it's packed, you know. And then I go to Portugal and, you know, a couple other places. But I'm able to do it sometimes when it's most profitable. I do it as a soloist, as a guest artist with a big band, or maybe coming in with a, you know, playing with some smaller combos or something like that. When I travel with the full Latin American jazz experience, for instance, I like for them to have a great time. So a lot of times when we play a festival or something, it's just maybe you get put up for a day or two, and then you're on your own, you know. So I'll often base a tour out of an area, and then I'll rent a band house or something for all of us so that everybody can come back, whether you train it back there or drive or whatever. And I want to make it a really fun, pleasant experience. And if it's in Sweden, my wife is Swedish, so she comes, and our kids often come. And now my son comes with us. As you know, he's a sax player too, so he's part of the group. So yeah, there's ways to do it, but it's tricky. And I think there's, you know, part of the answer is sponsorships, but sponsorships are mostly for the presenter and not for the band, you know. So it's tricky business.
Looking at, I mean, I've done some shows with you, Temptations, Four Top shows, and your experience with Ray Charles doing that full time. I guess the question would be, if you were touring with Ray today, would Ray still, in your opinion, still travel with the full band, or would he have a music director and hire horn sections from city to city where he went?
I think Ray's thing was very specialized, and I think Ray would be traveling in the same way. That was his sound, and I think he would still be drawing, if nothing, maybe even bigger audiences today.
We have a question, yes.
Aloha. What was your favorite horn section you played with?
So the question is, what was your favorite horn section that you've played with? That's a tough question.
Yeah, I don't know. That's like saying, who's your favorite child? You know, I've played in various horn sections in doing studio work where there's been some tremendous players, and then I never hear that, you know. I don't know. That's a question I really can't answer, you know. Because everything has its own vibe, and it's in the moment, you know. We've played together every time. It's been amazing, and I kind of feel that same way when I'm playing with other people as well.
Let me ask this way, devil's advocate, not really, but I can list, for me, like some of my favorite musical moments. I'm not saying best, but some of the ones that were really up there. So for you, what was one of your favorite moments working with a great horn section? How about that?
Well, I would say that working with Ray Charles was phenomenal. I mean, you know, and it wasn't just because the horn section was great. It was just the whole overall experience, and it was just because we were playing with this person. You know, my goal when I was like in high school, I saw, you know, Woody Herman's band, I saw Count Basie, I saw a bunch of bands, but and I loved them all, you know. I loved Maynard Ferguson, Doc Severinsen, all those guys. But I always, for some reason, I kind of liked Woody Herman's band, and I always really wanted to maybe get on that band because they were still touring at that time when I was young, and he was still on the band and all of that. And that never really materialized. And then this Ray Charles thing happened, and I felt like, wow, that's even bigger. And bigger scope. You're playing big band music, you're playing soul music, you're playing some rock stuff, you're playing some funky things, you know. And being around him was a lesson for everyone that was there. So I would say that's one of my favorites. And the other thing is in my Latin American jazz experience group, playing with my son has been really something special, because I would help him, even though he's a sax player, I would teach him. And since he was little, I'd say, here's a lick, now you play that. There's no music, you just listen. And so he's learned to really play. We've learned to play together as one. So there's something like super special about that. We've spent a lot of hours, a lot of years playing together. And now when we we write some of the horn arrangements and stuff together and do different things. So it's pretty cool.
Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, we're getting close to the end here of the interview. And I have a million more questions, but just unfortunately not enough time. I ask this of all the guests. If someone were to come to you now in 2026 and tell you, Bobby, I'm thinking about becoming a professional musician and undertaking this as a career, what is some advice that you have found personally to be very, very helpful for your development that you feel would be important to impart on them?
Well, I think the first thing is to really be able to play your instrument or instruments, to really play it on a high level, because you never know what kind of work you're going to be doing. It might be something very simple. It might be something very treacherous. Most of it's in the middle somewhere, you know, but there are certain expectations. So if you're trying to be a professional musician, it's a given that you can play your instrument. I think the bigger part of this is something, again, that I've imparted to my son, is that you have to treat this as you would any other business. If you're going to get up at, be to work at 8 in the morning and you're going to work till, 5 at night or whatever, that's what you do. That might mean, practicing for a couple hours. That might mean, going out and hustling, sending out emails, calling some contacts, doing, all of that stuff. You have to run, it's a business. And I think one of the most important parts of that business is learning how to market yourself. And today it's even easier than it was back then because of social media.
Speaking of that, if someone wanted to hire you for work or horn work or writing or a show, how would they get in touch with you?
You can learn more about me at bobbymedina.com. And you can check out my Latin American jazz experience at latinamericanjazzexperience.com as well if you want to see that.
And any shows coming up that you would like to mention or things that you're producing that is coming up?
Let's see. Yeah, I became artistic director for World Theater Foundation, and so we're producing the shows for the Roxy in Bremerton on Quincy Jones Square. So we have a fourth Thursday of the month jazz night, which you played a while back, which was awesome. We're bringing Devon Lewis in this next week here, coming Thursday on the 22nd. I have Darius Wilrich and his group coming in on the fourth Thursday in February. And then on March 14th, this is the one you got to write down, Saturday, it's Quincy Jones's birthday, and we're doing a big Quincy Jones tribute there at the Roxy. And for that, I bring out, it's a big band, but we also bring out some fabulous singers, and one of them is a friend of mine named Alvin Chia, who's a 10-time Grammy winner and bass vocalist and one of the founding members of Take Six vocal group. So that's coming up Saturday, March 14th.
Well, Bobby, it's been a sincere pleasure having you as our guest. Thank you so much for the putting up with the barraging of questions.
Thank you.
But it's a pleasure to get to know more of the backstory. And thank you all for joining us either in person or online. We're going to take a very short break, reconfigure here, and then we're going to start the concert at 3 o'clock here. So join us again for that, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.